So now we are back in the studio, and do we have Professor McIntosh with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, that's great to hear. For a wonderful talk. And as you said, our Professor Emeritus of Thermodynamics at the University of Leeds. Should also add that you have published 200 peer-reviewed articles also. So you have lots of experience from the topic of your talk today. And it was so interesting to hear and to listen to. And we have a few questions. So my first question is, like, in your talk, you weave together in a very nice way different fields of science. Physics and thermodynamics, you start with that, and then you go into the cell, talk about molecular biology, genetics, and then you end with information and also a bit of theology. But quite a lot of your talk focuses on what happens in our cells, and that they store information, and that it has to originate from an intelligent mind. So my first question would be that, do you think that the advances of molecular biology, let's say since the 1950s, is that one of the strongest arguments we have today for intelligent design and for ultimately for a creator?
Well, I can see why people will say something totally contradictory to what you've just said. They will say, well, Crick and Watson discovered the DNA, and this then means that there must be a material origin to information. But I agree with your point that actually when you really look at it carefully, it is showing the exact point that you've just made, that there has to be a mind behind the not necessarily the material part, although I do believe that God made the material as well. But when you come to information, people have to grasp that that is like software, and software, as you well know, cannot exist without a mind behind it. And once you realize that what's going on in the DNA is not just biochemistry, but it's actually the organization of these molecules on particular positions, that it's the position of the molecules which is determining the transfer of information, then that is immediately telling an engineer or someone who is used to software engineering in particular, that there has to be a software maker, there has to be a mind behind it. So the reason why biologists don't have to get this is because they're not trained in systems engineering. And an engineer immediately sees that their software is different to material.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that answer. And I love the picture you have of a piece of written text, that it could not be made, the contents could not be made by the piece of paper and the ink. It has to come from an intelligent mind, and it's the same thing in the human cell. And my second question is, like, is it possible to strengthen the arguments even more? So you mentioned that molecular machines, they are made up of proteins, and they require a template, and this template is stored in DNA. On the other hand, you showed also during your talk that molecular machines or proteins are needed for generating DNA. So it seems that we have a kind of, if we try to explain this by natural processes, it seems that we run into a causal circularity. What came first, the proteins or the DNA? Or you could also say, call it the chicken and egg problem. So what is your comment to that?
Well, it's exactly what you say, Ola, and it is a chicken and egg problem. You've got to have the chicken to make the egg, but you need the egg to make the chicken. And you need the proteins to make the DNA. You need the DNA and its software in order to make the proteins, as has just been shown. So there is actually no way around this. And again, I come back to this worldview issue, but it's not just worldview, because obviously if you're searching for some sort of naturalist explanation, even a person coming with an engineering mind will still try to find it. But it's particularly acute for a person who's not got an engineering understanding. The engineer immediately sees that there is layers of systems going on in the cell. So I've just shown you one example where you're dealing with at least 2 layers. Actually, there are multi-layers going on. And an engineer is used to that. He's used to the fact that there is a top level, there is a medium level, then there is levels going all the way down to the nuts and bolts of what it is that you're trying to do. That's human engineering. Well, it's exactly the same in the cell. The biochemistry is one thing, but what the biochemistry is answerable to is a whole set of instructions which have been passed down from a recognized system of software exchange. And then, of course, the very platform on which that software exchange is taking place is actually absolutely necessary for that system of software to be around. In other words, you've got to have the system of software and the hardware together for the whole thing to work. So it's really an example of what we call irreducible complexity. You cannot actually separate out the individual systems and say that they can exist on their own. They can't. They need one another to exist at all.
Yeah, that's really thrilling to think about. So, Göran or Samuel, do you have any questions right now?
Yes, I would like to ask you. I mean, a living cell is a system with a high degree of order, that is low entropy, but also high energy, because the organic molecules have a lot of energy in them. I heard an argument lately that this could be viewed as an argument against the spontaneous origin of life, because with an input of energy, you do have a system with a lower entropy, but never a system with higher energy content. And I don't know if that is another way of formulating the case that you just made in your speech.
Well, yes, that probably is another way of putting it, but I try to make things very accessible to the ordinary everyday person. So I prefer, if you don't mind, I prefer the illustration of the dam, right?
Yeah.
That the dam has got a lot of energy in it, but that energy is in a controlled position, ready to go down a specific pathway which will enable it to drive the turbines and produce electricity. Now, it's that type of thing that's going on in the biochemistry. It's just an illustration. I'm not really talking about dams. It's just an illustration. And in the biochemical terms, what you've got, even before you get to information, is that you've got energy in a race-specific state, ready to go down a particular chemical pathway, which will then enable it to then make the polymerization of DNA. That's the bit that I showed in my talk. Well, in order to get that raised state, you've got to use a very unstable molecule, ATP, to get it to that raised state. And again, you've got a chicken and egg situation, because the ATP, being very unstable, needs other biochemical molecules or biochemical systems around it in order to do what it does do, to get the raised energy states that everybody else needs, not just the ATP, but all the other systems like the kinesin that I mentioned also need the ATP. So it frankly is shouting to anybody who knows anything about hydrocarbon chemistry that you've got a very, very carefully balanced system where the energy states, as you rightly said, are in a raised level, and yet there is an ordered system where the entropy is exceedingly low. So I prefer coming at it from an illustrative point of view, but I come to the same conclusion as yourself, Dr. Schmidt.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that answer, Andy. And we have time for a last question. And at the end of your talk, you switched very beautifully to theology. And I know that you have also published books on theology, and in particular one book called Genesis for Today. So could you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, I've just got it out just to make sure I can show it to you. This is the book that I've produced, Genesis for Today, some years ago. And I very much take a young earth position, because both biblically, you cannot get away from what Russ Humphreys referred to, and others, I think you referred to it, Ola, Exodus 20, verse 11, which says that God, when he gave us the example of resting on the seventh day, it's because he made the world in 6 literal days. So theologically and biblically, you cannot get away from it, that the Bible clearly teaches 6 literal day creation. But scientifically, everything is telling us, from what I've just been saying, even though it doesn't immediately prove the amount of time that's involved, or when it happened rather, you cannot prove immediately a young earth creation. But nevertheless, everything is consistent with it. In particular, you can see that the idea of theistic evolution is precluded, that is what I should say, really excluded by the science, because the science is actually showing to us, as what I've just shown you, that there is, if you like, God's left his fingerprint on what he has made, that everything has to exist together. So I imagine when God made the eyes of the man born blind, right, that it happened immediately. And when we actually look at the science and the biochemistry of what I've just been considering in my talk, everything is indicating that it all has to be there together. So I maintain that although I can't prove the theology of whether it really was a long time ago, I can indicate from the science, or I get indications from the science, that it wasn't God using evolution, because we see Christ in the New Testament immediately calming the storms, immediately raising a man from the dead. And when I look at the science, it's actually indicating to me that you've got very intricate systems which have been put together, and God caused these to be made immediately because they were all needed together immediately. That's what I'm trying to indicate, that the irreducible complexity argument indicates that everything was made all together immediately. I don't know when it happened, although biblically I would say that it was just of the order of a few thousand years ago, but everything is telling me that it was all made together. It didn't just evolve over billions of years. As Dr. Gerdmar very carefully showed in the theology, I believe the science actually supports that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andy, for that answer. And it's really fascinating thinking about creation as a miraculous event that started everything. And I actually would like to highly recommend this book, Genesis for Today. I have a copy myself. And thanks a lot, Andy. And
thank you, everybody.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.